Okay, we are on Yud Aleph Amud Bet 11b1 if you're following in the art scroll, and the Gemara over here just finished describing the all the people talking about their own leadership, how if they rule the world, they didn't rule the world, but what is clear is that Ahashverosh ruled over the entire world, kola kippah, like the Gemara says. Okay, Gemara now continues. And it was in those days, Kishevet, now follow closely. Kishevet HaMelech Achashverosh means as Achashverosh sat down on the throne. Okay? Now it sounds like you're starting the narrative, you're saying, and it was when he sat on the throne, right? So it sounds like we're going to now follow and talk about the party that he's going to throw. It was as he sat on the throne. So when did he throw the party? Right away, when he sat on the throne, right? Carry on. The pasuk immediately says, "Kishevet HaMelech Achashverosh al kisei malchuto asher b'Shushan habira b'shnat shalosh le'molcho." Right? It's not in the first pasuk, but it says in the third year of his reign, he called all the people, all of the royal messengers and the royal the advisors and the princes and the dukes and all of the people of the realm, and he threw a massive party. We're all familiar with the beginning of the story, but it seems like a little bit of a contradiction, because in one place it says, as he sat on his throne, in another place it says, and it was in the third year. Was it upon his ascension to the throne, or was it in the third year? Contradiction. Okay? Answers the Gemara, which was it? Amarava Rava explains, my kishevet, what does it mean? As he sat, it doesn't mean as he sat on the throne, which would indicate the beginning of his rule, but rather when, like we say, yishuv hadat means when a person is settled. Okay, mi ityashev, who's going to be settled, or are you na vanad? Are you moving all the time? So the idea of being settled is at the time when Ahashverosh was settled on his throne, he threw a party. When was that? 3 years in. What made Ahashverosh feel settled, secure, comfortable on his throne? The Gemara answers, what does it mean? What set his mind at ease? He said, Belshazzar made a calculation, but he made a mistake. I'm going to make a calculation, and I'm not going to make a mistake. The Gemara is now going to go into the erroneous calculation of Belshazzar, and now come and tell us the calculation of Achashverosh, which he thought was not an error, but actually wound up also being an error. Okay, let's just give a little bit of a background here. Okay, in terms of the kingships that we're following until we get to Achashverosh, you have Nebuchadnezzar, then you have Evil Merodach. Okay, after Evil Merodach, you have Belshazzar. Okay, after Belshazzar, you have Daryavish, the Mede, then you have Koresh, the Cyrus, the Persian, and then you have Achashverosh. Okay, that's the order of the kings. Nebuchadnezzar is the guy that destroys the Beit HaMikdash, correct? Yeah? Now, there's one thing we need to know. We need to know, and again, we're going to go through the system straight, but I want to give you the overview first so that the Gemara is not confusing. We have a statement that says that Hashem told the Jewish people that he's going to redeem them after 70 years. But the question is, when do those 70 years begin? Okay? We clear? Belshazzar makes a mistake. He assumes an early start point for the 70 years, so therefore the 70 years end early. Okay? He makes a party. What does he do? He's going to use the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay? Takes out the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. He pays for that with his life. He dies that night. By the way, fascinating insight is what happens in that story is everyone's there, everyone's at this party. All of a sudden, they see a vision of a hand writing on the wall, writes on the wall that Belshazzar is going to die. Belshazzar is terrified. He calls in Daniel. Daniel explains to him what's going to happen, and he dies that night. Okay, and he loses the kingdom. Now, what's interesting is, ironically, like Drew just pointed out, right, is exactly that point. Jonah just pointed out exactly that point, that the phrase, the writing on the wall, is a biblical phrase that comes from that story. that there's writing on the wall, and now you know that the good times are done. There's no more easy mortgages, there's no more et cetera, SBA loans, whatever the case might be. All right, so he dies on that night, and the rulership transfers to Daryavish. Okay, and after Daryavish to Koresh, after Koresh to Achashverosh. Achashverosh makes a later prediction that the 70 years start at a later point. So he also makes a party, and he also uses the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. But his years, because they start too early, are again end too early. So therefore, they don't count either. But he's also punished for throwing the party and using the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay? The Gemara now is going to go through the calculations, what the calculation was based on, and why they were wrong. Let's begin. Gemara says, everyone have the drone shot now? Yeah? Okay, Gemara goes as follows. Says the Gemara. Okay. Mai. What was the heshbon? Answers the Gemara. Dichtiv, because the pasuk says, Ki lefi melot lebavel, 70 shana, when 70 years will be up, lebavel, to Bavel, ifkod etchem, I will remember you. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. Okay? I'm going to remember you, Jewish people, after 70 years, lebavel, to Bavel. Uchtiv, and it says, lemalot lecharavot Yerushalayim, 70 shana, to complete, right? When you fill the destructions of Jerusalem, 70 years. So in other words, what does that mean? That the rebuilding of the destruction of Jerusalem will happen after 70 years. So we know that God's going to remember the Jews after 70 years, and we know that means that he's going to rebuild Jerusalem after 70 years. If that's the case, says the Gemara, Belshazzar says, Chashov 45 Nebuchadnezzar. The 45 years that Nebuchadnezzar was a king in Bavel, he counted 45 years. Plus, the Evil Merodech, the king that followed, was ruled for 23 years. 45 and 23 is?
78.
Nope, 68. So therefore, what was missing after he took over, after the 23 years of Evil Merodech, he adds in, Vitarti Dideh, and 2 of his own years of ruling. Now, how many years does he rule completely? How many years is Belshazzar king for? 3 years. So after 2 years, after 2 years of his ruling, they're at 70 years, right? And what did we say? He makes the party at the 70 years, and he dies right away. So what happened to the 3rd year of his reign? We'll see in just a minute. Hashivim, so 2 years of his reign, that makes 70. Apik mani de Mikdash, he took out the vessels of Beit HaMikdash, vishtamash, poured himself a drink in the cups of the Beit HaMikdash, served a charcuterie board, on the platters of the Beit HaMikdash, used all the vessels thinking that he was free and clear, and he dies that night. Now the Gemara says, okay, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar minala da 45 shanin malach. How do we know that he ruled for 45 years? So we just said that there was 45 years. How do you know? The Gemara is going to proceed to show it from the Pesukim. Says the Gemara, Damar mar, galu b'sheva, galu b'shmone, galu b'shmona'esre, galu b'tsha'esre. Sounds like they're drunk. They were exiled in 7, they were exiled in 8, they were exiled in 18, they were exiled in 19. What does that mean? Gemara explains that this phrase was really 2 different statements, and in each one of them, the 2 statements refer to the same story. So the first 2, that they were exiled in 7 and exiled in 8, refers to one story. What is that talking about? Galu b'sheva lekibush Yehoyakim gilegalut Yehoyachan. There's a king in Yerushalayim, and his name is Yehoyakim. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar goes to fight against Yehoyakim. Yehoyakim has a son whose name is Yehoyachin. Yehoyakim gets put into prison. Yehoyachin gets exiled, okay, to Bavel. Are we clear so far? So the Gemara says as follows. When did that happen? They were exiled. So the galut is referring to the galut of Yehoyachin. When did that happen? In the 7th year. Shehi Shmone Nebuchadnezzar, which is the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Okay? So that means that how many years was Nebuchadnezzar a king before he did this conquest? 1 year. 7 years after he took Yehoyakim, Galut happened to Yehoyachin. Clear?
Why does it say the 8th to Nebuchadnezzar?
Because Nebuchadnezzar was already a king in Bavel. He was king for 1 year before his conquest in Jerusalem.
Oh, it's counting of the Yehoyakim years.
Exactly.
1 through 7 plus that.
Exactly. So one more time. Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king. 1 year, first thing he does, by the way, is attack Assyria, Ashur. All right? He overthrows the king of Ashur. That's year 1. 1 year into his reign, he attacks Yerushalayim. He takes Yehoiakim the king and puts him in prison. Yehoiachin is still in Israel. 7 years later, they come back and they do galut. They take Yehoiachin and many of the Jewish noblemen and they take them and they leave to Bavel. So the process happens in a period of time. What happens in the second phase of this galut phrase? In the 18th year, what does it say? Galu bishmonase, they were exiled in the 18th year. What does that mean? Bishmonase lekibush Yehoiakim. So 18 years after Yehoiakim, the story begins with Yehoiakim, Galut Tzidkiyahu, the next king of Israel was the king of Tzidkiyahu. He was the last king of Israel. After him, there were no more kings. Okay? So the king Tzidkiyahu, what happens? In the 18th year, they exiled Tzidkiyahu. Shehi Chayesre the Nebuchadnezzar. That's the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar. So the galut is complete at that point. That's when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and destroys the Bet HaMikdash. Okay? The Amar Mar, like Mar explained, Shana Rishona Kivush Ninveh. The first year he attacked Ninveh and took over the Assyrian king in Ninveh. The second year, Shniya, in the second year, Kivesh Yehoiakim, he conquered Yehoiakim, and the beginning of this process continued. So now we know, at the time of the destruction of the temple, the Galut of Tzidkiyahu, where are we up to in Nebuchadnezzar's reign? 19 years, 18 years from the conquest, the original conquest of Yehoiakim. Okay? Now, regardless of that fact, what do we know? So 19 years in. Says the Pasuk, Uchtiv, Vahi b'shloshim v'sheva shana legalut Yehoiachin, and it was in the 37th year of the Galut Yehoiachin, right? Melech Yehuda, b'shnem asar lechodesh, b'esrim v'chamisha lechodesh, on the 25th of the month, Nasa Evil Mirodach, Melech Bavel, Evil Mirodach, the second king of Bavel, he became Nasa et Rosh Yehoiachin, Melech Yehuda, v'yotze oto mibet hakele, he took him out of prison. So in the 37th year, okay, of the Galut of Yehoiachin, he was taken out of prison. Because on that day, that was the day that Evil Merodach became the king. There was a very famous thing they used to do, the kings, when they would become king, as part of their ascent to power, they would illustrate their mercy, and really their mercy was an expression of their power, and they would release political prisoners, exactly, like a royal pardon, of the previous king. Okay?
So like the opposite. We do it at the end of the...
Because ours is not a real power. It's the end of your power. It's like the last gasp is the pardon is presidential pardon. It doesn't have to be that way, by the way. You could technically do it earlier, but most presidents don't want to do it earlier because it affects them. They don't want the flack. Okay? Now, says there have been actually presidential pardons that happen during presidencies. It happens when they're willing to take the flack because it's not a big deal. Trump pardoned in the middle as well. Okay? Now, so what happens over here? In the 37th, strike that from the record. In the 37th year of Yehoiachin, okay, at that point, he was released from prison. Now, if you remember, how many years into that was Yehoiachin's galut? What did we say? It was in the 7th year from Yehoiakim, in the 8th year. What's 37 plus 8 is exactly 45. So we know that point was the point of transfer of power. So Nebuchadnezzar was a king for 45 years. Just so you understand, and that political climate, to be a king for 45 years, is practically unheard of. Nebuchadnezzar's extreme power was such. Why is it unheard of? Because kings are always being killed by other kings. That's how it was back then, right? You lived as a king. The worst job in the world was being the king. You were constantly at war. Everyone is trying to kill you from outside the royal court and from inside the royal court. Et tu brute, right? Famous line from Julius Caesar, Shakespeare. So the idea, my friends, is that you normally have everyone gunning for your head. But Nebuchadnezzar, we already learned, was Malach b'kippah. He ruled the world. So he didn't have many natural enemies because he conquered them all. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar rules with absolute power for 45 years until he dies and the kingship transfers to Evil Merodach. So we got 45 years at that point. Okay, Yehoiakim gets taken out of prison. Now the Gemara continues. So 45 plus Tmani, 8 years before, what happens? He does in the 8th year of his reign is when he attacks Yerushalayim. Vitlatim v'sheva, and the 37 afterwards that he rules after that point. Harei 45, that's 45. The Nebuchadnezzar. Ve'esrim v'tlat, in the 23 years, the Evil Merodach Gemara, we know that that's a Jewish tradition, that Evil Merodach ruled, we know, for 23 years, so 45 and 23, the Tarte Dideh, and 2 of his own equals 70. Amar, Belshazzar said, Hashal Vadai, Tulo Mifarki. If God said he's going to save them after 70 years and he did not do so, it's already been 70 years. But we took out the vessels and used them. That's what Daniel said to him. You went above the master of the heavens, and you used the vessels of his house. You brought them before you. And it says, that night they killed Belshazzar, who was murdered in his own castle, Kazda'ah, from Kazdim, from the Chaldean king, which is of Bavel, of Kazda. And it says, V'daryavesh, Mada'a, and Darius the Mede, at that point, he ascends to the throne at the age of 62. Now, my friends, so what have we got here? 45 plus 23 plus 2. But what do we say already? How many years is Belshazzar king? 3. And he dies on the day that he uses vessels.
Well, we said that's year 2.
So what are we missing? It's year 2, not year 3.
We're missing a year.
Missing a year. So I look, the commentators over here don't explain it, but it seemed actually quite obvious to me. Yes, they hit year 70 in the 2nd year of his reign. But God said, in 70 years, I'm going to redeem you. How long do you have to wait to know that has not been done? A full year from the point that you hit 70 years. That's his 3rd year of the reign. Okay? Now.
So it doesn't say when the party could have been on the 364th day of the 3rd year into year 3?
It would have been the end of the 3rd year of his reign.
Right, it's like year 2 plus a day.
Unless we hear unless Belshazzar knew from some other calculation, right, that Nebuchadnezzar ascended the throne at a specific point in the calendar year, and then he could have counted potentially from there. But the point is, remember, what is he counting it from? He's counting it because it says 70 years, Libavel. From the time when there was 70 years of a Babylonian kingdom, I'm counting it from then. So he's using the 70 years from the time Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king. Now I want you to understand how wild that is. Why would God have done that? Why would God have counted the year of Bavel before Nebuchadnezzar even attacked Yerushalayim? Why would that random, factoid be relevant?
Does the attack in Syria have anything?
The attack in Nineveh?
Yeah, does it have anything?
I wouldn't have assumed so. Now, by the way, you said something interesting. What did you say? The attack in?
Syria.
Not Syria. Assyria.
Assyria.
If it was Syria, then we could actually begin to have a conversation. Why? Because the Gemara in Gittin says that David HaMelech, there you go. Gemara tells in Gittin that David annexed Syria at the time and made it part of Eretz Israel. Now, you can't make it part of Eretz Israel for all the laws of Eretz Israel because it's not. It's not what God said Israel is. But as a king at that time, he was able to take a piece of Syria and extend it, which again explains to us why there's such an ancient Jewish presence in Aram Soba, in Syria. In fact, there was a synagogue in Syria that they used to call the synagogue of Yoav ben Tzruya. Who's Yoav ben Tzruya? The general of David HaMelech. Which is wild to me because a famous Syrian name is Seruya. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, So,
I said Syria. Rabbi.
so if it was Syria, then it would make sense, because if Nebuchadnezzar in year 1, if he conquers Syria, right, then that would make sense that that's like the beginning of something with Israel. But Nineveh has nothing to do with anything. So why do we count it? So Belshazzar, he looks at the pasuk and he's taking it literally. Remember, it's wild because you have kings of the world and they're looking in our pasukim to figure out their battle
If
strategies.
they're going to live or not, that's what's also, they believe that.
They believed. Absolutely, they believed. Isn't that crazy? And they were scared before they could come up with their pshat in the pasuk, right? They're not going to touch the vessels. Very interesting. Okay, let's carry on. So, Gemara says, Amar Iu, so Achashverosh looks at this cheshbon and he's like, this guy's a loser. Mititai, he made a mistake. Yeah?
One or two.
Bet HaMikdash 1, because remember they built 2 after Achashverosh.
And they reuse the same vessels from them?
When? In the second Bet HaMikdash?
Yeah.
I would assume that they were able to reuse those vessels, but some of the vessels, as we explained previously, disappeared and were gone forever. The Aron, as we said, the Shemin HaMishcha, when we discussed the En Ben of Kohen Gadol, of Hamashuach versus Kohen Gadol of Begadim. Okay. Amar Iu mitatai. This guy made a mistake. Okay. I'm gonna make a mistake. I'm gonna make the cheshbon. I'm not gonna make a mistake because he had extensive training as a stable boy in mathematics. Michtiv, who says lemalchut Bavel? Does it say to the kingship of Bavel? No. LeBavel ktiv. It says to Bavel. My LeBavel, legalut Bavel. That means that until the Jews were exiled to Bavel, why would God start counting? Why would he set a 70-year redemption counter before started an exile counter? So therefore the difference, the discrepancy between Belshazzar's cheshbon and Achashverosh cheshbon is how long? Well, let's remember, what year does he start in? He starts in the first year of Nebuchadnezzar. What year into that? How many years are going to be off? We said 37 plus 8. So the cheshbon should be different, should be off by exactly how much? 8 years. And let's see, how do we make up this 8-year difference? Gemara says as follows. Kama Batziran, how much was he short, Belshazzar? Tmani. Remember the 8 years before, from Nebuchadnezzar's reign, where there was a Babylonian kingdom, where he counted 70 years from Bavel, right, is off by 8 years, because 8 years into Nebuchadnezzar's reign is the galut of Yehoiachin. He added those 8 into the cheshbon of 70. Chada de Belshazzar, 1, which is the 3rd year of Belshazzar, which would have been 71. Remember, we said he had a full extra year after 70 ended, right? That he waited for the party. So even though he's waiting because he's scared of that, but you have to count that year, right? Because that year is technically 71 would have passed if you waited the whole year. So he counts the 3rd year of Belshazzar. V'chamesh de Daryavish v'Koresh. There were 5 years together that Darius and Cyrus ruled. So we have one king, Nebuchadnezzar, that rules for 45 years, and Koresh and Daryavish together don't even manage to muster more than 5 years together. Okay? So Belshazzar is 3, right? Koresh and Daryavish are 5. But 2 of Belshazzar's are in the cheshbon. So the 3rd year of Belshazzar is 1. The 5 years of Koresh and Daryavish bring us to 6. And 2 of his, Hashiv'in, are 70. When does he make his party? Bishnat Shalosh. Same as Belshazzar. Even though 70 is in the 70 years, he's got to wait a full year into his kingdom, into his counting, in order to make sure that 70 years have come and gone, and God didn't save them. Bishnat Shalosh Limilcho Kishevet Amelach Hashverosh. So what do we have? We have a contradictory statement, which now has been resolved. When is Achashverosh sure of his reign?
Into the 3rd year.
When is he kishevet? When is he relaxed on the throne? In the 3rd year. And when 3 years into his reign are done. because 2 years count as the 70. He waits the full 70th year to see if God does anything. God does not do anything, and then he throws the party. Since he saw that 70 years were completed, i.e., from year 2 to year 3 of his reign, and they were not saved. After this, they're not going to be redeemed. And he used them. How do we know that he used the vessels of Beit HaMikdash? Because it says, the kelim mikelim shonim. And the vessels from vessels which were different. In what way were they different? They were different in the fact that all the other vessels belonged to the king. These vessels did not belong to him. Okay? So he used the vessels of Beit HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, interesting. Bas Satan, v'riked benehem. Came the Satan and he danced amongst them. V'harag et Vashti. So when Belshazzar died, when Belshazzar threw the party, what happened in that moment? What happened? You guys remember? He dies that night. How come Achashverosh doesn't die that night? Vashti dies that night. Interesting. Vashti is the daughter of Belshazzar, if you remember. So the idea of using the vessels of Beit HaMikdash, whose idea was that? Belshazzar's idea. Now we're revisiting that idea. So God says, I have to punish Achashverosh, but I also have to punish Belshazzar. Why? Interesting. We say on Rosh Hashanah, the Sifrei Hayim Umetim Petuchim Lefanecha. The books of the living and the dead are open in front of you on this day. That's what we say on Rosh Hashanah. Ask the commentators, what do we mean? The books of the living. The books of the living, let's see, are they going to manage to get another year or not? Are they going to get sick? Are they going to have an accident, a car accident? Why are the books of the dead open? Let them lie. The Chachamim explain, because every year the dead are also pulled in front of the court in Shamayim. And Hashem says, in this past year, was there more Torah learned in the world because of you? Did someone say Kaddish? Mishnayot? Did the Morris Franco Cancer Center, did they do chesed? If that's the case, then that all accrues to you, and your place in Gan Eden, or Gehinam Barminan, it has to change. So they ruled again. Belshazzar again gets another ruling now, because his action is being, what do we call it? They're serial killers, we say. A lot of times it's copycat crimes. This guy tried to copy you, so I have to do something, exact the price from both of you. Well, how do we exact that price from Belshazzar and Achashverosh simultaneously? His wife passes away.
Wasn't the party longer than 1 day, though?
180 days.
So then how do we say that on the first use of the vessel, Vashti can't die on party 1, does she?
Sorry?
Does Vashti die on day 1 or day 80?
It doesn't say when she dies. It also doesn't say, by the way, at what point he took out the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash.
So
it's not a party.
First night,
Exactly.
Like Belshazzar, but
Now,
Belshazzar was 1 night?
If I'm not mistaken, that party actually initially the Jews are not invited to.
Party number 1.
The beginning of the party is a party only for his closest, the royalty. And at a later point in time, he invites the Jews to come as well. So that was the time where it conflates. Okay? So this is the Gemara. If that's the case, if that's the case, that he's right. So how come the Jews were not saved at 70 years? Answer the Gemara. He also made a mistake. What was his mistake? He should have counted from the actual destruction of Yerushalayim. When did that happen? So when did he count? He counted 8 years in, right? That's what he said was missing. 8 years in is when Yehoiachin is exiled. So he counts from the beginning of the exile of Bavel. But the Pasuk says, I will remember, in 70 years, I will remember Charvot Yerushalayim. When was that destruction, as we said earlier? In the 18th year. So he's off by in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar. So he's off by another 11 years. By the way, interestingly enough, if you look at the Megillah, as it reads, most people don't pay attention. In the beginning, you're like, oh, Achashverosh, party. No, that's year 3. Then it tells us, Bishnat, in this year of his kingdom, he appoints Haman, Yimach Shemo. In this year of his kingdom, he marries Esther. In this year, the story is a long story, exactly. Okay? And in the aftermath of the story of Achashverosh, okay, so I believe it takes, so there's the final story of the Jewish people is remembered. Now, by the way, the remembrance of the Jewish people does not mean that they're going to be back in Eretz Israel. It means that they're going to begin the redemption. And that point begins at the end of the Megillah story when the Jewish people find favor in the eyes of Achashverosh, and the story begins to turn around, culminating in them going back to Eretz Israel. Okay? Let's continue. Says the Gemara, Sof Sof, in the end, Kama Batziran, how much is left? Chad Sareh, 11. Iu Kama Malach, how long did Achashverosh rule? Arbesar, says the Gemara, 14 years. Be'abesar dideh ibayle limibne bet hamikdash. So that means, according to what you're saying, if God says, in 70 years I'll remember them from the destruction of Yerushalayim, then within his leadership, Bet HaMikdash should have been destroyed. Alama ketiv. So therefore, why does it say, Ba'adin betalt avidit bet elahadi b'Yerushalayim? How come it says that at that point, the Bet HaMikdash was stopped from being rebuilt? Gemara says, Amarava, Shanim Mekutaot Havu. The reason is because in the Cheshbon of the 70, there were a lot of partial years that were counted. So in other words, he ruled for this amount of time, this amount of years. But that was really only half of the full year. And this guy came into kingdom 23 years. 23 years might be missing a little bit in the beginning, missing a little bit in the end. And therefore, those missing times contribute together to allow us to get to the point where they built the Beit HaMikdash. Now, I want to just show you the words of Rashi. Rashi says, let's just take a look for a second. Shanim Mekutaot. You see it? Can you find? You see the words of Rashi? Shani Mekutaot, it's right about, I would say, 4/6 down the page. Shani Mekutaot havu. Otan shanin shemaninan lemala, yesh ben shenivleu mishel acharon birishon. Kigon ledayavesh hamadai v'koresh shemanin lehem heshanim. We counted for these two people 5 years. Lo timtzai ledalad. You really only find 4. Dichtiv b'shnat echat ledayavesh ben Achashverosh b'sefer Daniel. You find in the first year of Darius, the son of Achashverosh, Bishnat Shalot lemalchut Koresh, in the 3rd year of the kingship of Koresh. V'tanya b'seder olam lo matzinu lemadai shana beketuvim elazu bilvad. We only find 1 year in the pasuk. We only find this 1 year. The Koresh matzinu shlosha shanim b'sefer Daniel b'shnat shalosh lemalchut Koresh. So each time you find that if it was into the year, we counted it as a year. So therefore, there's parts of the years that are missing, and that is the discrepancy that we're missing in terms of the rebuilding of Beit HaMikdash. U'kinegdo nishtaheh binyan shtayim shanim leDaryavesh. 2 more years into the years of Daryavesh, the king Darius, the son of Achashverosh. Okay?
4 and into, we count it as 5.
Sorry?
If it's 4 plus 1, we're counting it as 5 years. Because it says that Darius and Cyrus are 4 and some.
Correct.
So count it as 5.
Correct. So in other words, you'll say he ruled for a year, even though his ruling did not last out the year.
It's the 50th.
Yeah, in and including.
Where do we see
In
that?
time, was it? I mean, I'm sure that's long because we went there. Inclusive.
Which specific?
The
Inclusive
fast.
numbers, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
with the fast, no?
Yes, exactly. All right? Okay, let's just, you know what, actually, we let's finish here because we always come late to Mincha. All right.